Every single time I talk about this, there's some sort of hate, some sort of explosion that happens on the internet. And I just figured what better way than to dunk my head back into the topic again, because I just don't understand how else to talk about this. Over the last, 7 years now, we have had more experience probably selling wheels and selling performance parts and selling suspension than ever before. And where everyone else has kind of just talked about the product and have just tried to get you to buy the thing that you're already looking for, what we've really tried to do, especially with Martiniworks, is help educate around what you're trying to buy or build so that it doesn't feel like such a slap in the face when you post it on the internet and all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of shit because you bought the wrong part. Now, there's so many people out there that are going to talk about how rep wheels are garbage and Enki is trash and Rotiform is trash and Rotas are good now apparently, and it's a little weird, and we don't want to make the opinion for you. We just want to give you the unfiltered, raw, objective truth of it all. So in today's episode of 20 minutes of information, we're talking about rep wheels, which I feel like I'm already putting like a bullseye on my back right now by even talking about this. But here's the great news. Martiniworks now has a filter where you're able to see over the course of 10,000 wheels or so that we have on the website, what is an original wheel design, what is an inspired wheel design, and what is a replica wheel design. And that is like the biggest thing. Nobody's ever done that before. We're the first ones to do it, which is really, really exciting. But at the same time, it's also very scary because when you're the first one to do anything, a lot of times you're usually the first one to get the most amount of crap. Now, we think this is the right decision for a multitude of reasons. Number one being the fact that we think that a lot of times people are getting this whole conversation about a replica wheel wrong. Here's what we have for the rep wheel definition, which is the first thing we want to talk about. We believe, and we're confident, we'll die on this hill, that the rep wheel definition is a design that shares greater than 80% of its key features with an already existing design, which has been utilized in motorsport and or has heritage in use across the globe. We think that that's happened because when we look at different designs, when you look at an original wheel design, we think that that's less than 40% of any other design. We think that an original design is the first of its kind. It's commonly accepted as the first. It has cultural significance in the community. It has the ability and has been seen in motorsport in the past, and it's still supported by its original wheel manufacturer to this day. With that being said, there are some wheels that carry some design from the past, but they're not supported anymore, in which case that would be more of an inspired by design. And when we see something that's an obvious design familiarity to something like an original wheel, we're calling that a replica wheel design. Now, a replica wheel design does not inherently mean that the wheel is bad. In fact, a lot of times a replica wheel design that's made in 2024 from a brand like Enki is going to be as strong, if not better than maybe even original wheel design like something like a Work CR Kiwami. Now, that is already getting feisty, but I'm just kind of getting into it a little bit. But where did reps come from? Huge question I get asked all the time. They say the first race happened when the second car was built and came off the line. And I'll be really honest with you, I think it's the same thing with wheels. When you go all the way back to like the late 1940s-ish into the 1950s, one of the biggest first brands into the space was Enki. A lot of people are gonna say, oh, it's pronounced NK. Okay, first off, I remember because I was the one that told all of you that, because then I got yelled at by Enki. Enki even told me, we do not like when people say NK because it is not a known way of saying the name in the United States. Please refer to us as Enki. What we think has actually happened is back in the 50s, Enki was one of the first ones to really come in and start offering a style of aftermarket wheel to the growing Honda market that was happening over in Japan. Work obviously came around in the 70s, so did Rays and Advan and Volk. But actually, at the same time that was happening, there was another brand on the complete opposite side of the spectrum known as XXR that was making wheels as well. They've been in production, they've been in business for almost 50 years. It's absolutely insane how long XXR has been in business. But the same thing could be said, where a lot of times, once people realized that there was money in the aftermarket wheel market, everybody started making wheels. Everyone, Japan, America, Europe, all of them. Anytime there's motorsport, anytime there's somebody throwing a car around the side of a track, you're gonna see a bunch of brands start to pop up. And with replica wheel brands, they pretty much what they did is they saw an opportunity to make these wheels in a similar fashion, maybe not to the best of quality, and they just kind of replicated the design that was really popular in Germany and they brought it to the United States. Or it was really popular in the United States and they brought it over to Japan, or Japan to Europe, and that goes on and on and on and on and on. But back in the day, it was really hard to see some of that because there wasn't the World Wide Web. So over time, as people started to get more familiar with what wheels came from where, the concept of a replica wheel design really began to grow, as I would say, in the 80s and into the 90s, and it started creating a derogatory conversation in the 90s and into the 2000s. And then once you got onto the internet, the whole broke loose and nobody's the wiser for some reason. Now, here's what I will say. There are replica wheels across every single piece of green, beautiful earth. Just because a wheel brand comes from Japan does not inherently mean that it's not a replica wheel of some kind. A lot of original Japanese wheels, especially from the 80s, were actually copied from BBS. BBS was and probably still is the king of mesh style wheels. For the longest time, especially if it's something on a 5-lug that's a little bit bigger, they've always had it. And a lot of times, almost a lot of mesh style designs originate from the foundation of how BBS designs their wheels. But that's not to say that America didn't have some good ones too. The American Torque Thrust is actually an American-made wheel. It was probably one of the most, if not the most popular aftermarket wheel ever made. And it was so popular, especially in like I want to say the 70s, where people from Japan were coming and taking those wheels and trying to fit them onto their cars in the 70s and then realized that you really couldn't, so they started remaking and redesigning a similar American Torque Thrust wheel over in Japan. You'll actually see it on some old pictures, especially on the Bosuzoku stuff, where you'll actually kind of catch a little whiff of a design. You're like, that kind of looks like a torque thrust. And the answer is, it is. It's as close as you can. And I don't think, especially as you look at a rep wheel being a rep wheel, the concept of it is inherently bad. What's happened is there was a design that was so beloved in a certain market or in a certain place in this world that people wanted to get it into a different area. And back in the day, especially in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of import-export of aftermarket wheels, meaning that you weren't actually getting a lot of JDM stuff shipped over to America. Sure, it happened, but not at the scale of what's happening in 2024. So to get something like that was much harder. You had to know a lot more people. It took a lot longer. And instead, what a lot of companies decided to do is they just decided to offer that within the country that the business was started. And it wasn't necessarily seen as such a bad thing because it just wasn't available to get at the time. You couldn't go get an R32 GTR aftermarket wheel style in America 2 months after Ray's dropped a wheel like that. Now, and if you did, it was ultra expensive. And so a lot of times when people start to talk about why do reps get so much hate, it's a very simple answer, but it also has a lot more depth than what I think people would want to believe. The reason reps get a whole lot of, well, I guess you'd say hate or controversy or criticism is because of two main reasons. Number one, people think that if it's a replica design, then the technology behind it is equally bad. Because they stole the design, they must have stolen how the wheel is made, and the wheel that is made is bad. I don't know how those two correlate, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to be a rep defender, but that's just not always true. A really great example is that Enki has a lot of really great original wheels. They also have some that are inspired by design, but they also have some that are very clearly a replica design. Really common example of this would be the Enki PF01 looking almost identical to a Work CR Kiwami one piece. The Enki T6R is a fantastic wheel, features all sorts of new technology, has a whole bunch of things to keep it really light, objectively better than what it replicates sometimes. The Enki T6R is a really lightweight wheel, really iconic looking design. I love the way it looks, I love the way that it's manufactured, and it's Enki, it's got the stamps, but it's a Volti E37. A lot of times when we look at these wheels, even if you compare the Enki PF01 to the Work CR Kiwami, from a functional perspective, the PF01 is a better wheel. It's lighter, it has more technology, it's more supported, it comes in a really good range of wheels, and dollar for dollar, the PF01 probably should be outperforming the one-piece CR Kiwami. But because it's a replica design, a lot of people just automatically assume because it's a PFO1 and it's not the original that it must be worse. That's not the truth. We kind of have to split those two things apart. That's the first reason, and I think sometimes people don't like replica wheels, is because they assume the wheel is just worse. Now, in other cases, they are. There is 100% replica wheels out there that just aren't good. And some of the easiest ways to see it is if the brand has absolutely no heritage, legacy, or doesn't even try to really put anything together to show you that their wheels can be used for certain things. Now, a long time ago in a land far, far away, ESR started their wheel brand making replica wheels. That was their whole thing. The SR03, the SR08, all of those were replica wheel designs. And over time, you know, they got really popular. They started selling a lot of those wheels. ESR ended up taking a lot of that money, and then they started to invest in making 2-piece and 3-piece wheels. And then they started going into sponsoring and making better wheels through their RF or their rotary forged lineup. Then they started to sponsor drivers. Then they started to get ESR onto Formula Drift cars. And now a lot of that money's been pushed into other brands that are underneath the ESR umbrella, or however you want to call it. And some of their wheels are actually really freaking good, whereas some of them are still just a replica design. That's an example of a company that I would argue, depending on what wheel you're looking at, is objectively doing it right. Rotiform carried a very similar idea, but they was more inspired by designs in that because they were taking a lot of OE style designs and turning them into aftermarket equivalents. But there are replica wheel brands out there where they're just copying a design. They're doing absolutely no support. They're trying to make it for as cheap as possible in China. They're trying to make it the paint, like the least amount of paint you could possibly put on it, and they're sending that out and they're shipping that out. There's a reason you don't really hear about JNC anymore. Very common example of a company that came into the market, took as many designs as they possibly could, made a bunch of molds, sold as much as they could, realized that the returns were going skyrocketingly high, and then they just kind of disappeared, you know? And there's other examples of companies that do that as well. I think when you start to look at a company like Enki sometimes having a replica design versus maybe something like an Avid AV6 or an Avid 1 making a replica design, I think you can see that there's a difference in that conversation between the two brands. One is just going at it from a money perspective, and I think the other one's going at it from a, well, here's a design that works, it has the big brake clearance, it has everything that it needs, let's make it the best version we possibly can, and then we're gonna sell that to the market. Unfortunately, that makes it tough for people that are buying wheels to decide which one should you get, which is why we added the filters to the website so that you can really clearly see not just the design element, but now you'll be able to actually see the construction of it as well. We're labeling out if a wheel is gravity cast, low pressure cast, rotary forged, fully forged, or multi-piece, so that you can put those two pieces of information together to say, hey, maybe it's a design that's a little, it's a replica design, the PFO1, but it's flow formed, it's super light, it has bead knurling, the finish is awesome, and it comes in the fitment that I need. I think I'm good with that. Now you know instead of not knowing, I guess is the way that we want to see that. Now, I've already talked about, like, can reps be good? And the answer is yes. You know, reps can be good. I think a really great example is an idea that just because it's a replica design, that means it's a bad thing. You can be against a design being a replica, but that does not inherently mean that the wheel is bad, because it's just not. All wheels break, they all do it. You put something through enough stress, it's gonna happen, it's gonna blow up. But sometimes you really would prefer it to bend. A lot of times that's gonna depend on technology, not the design. Again, I'm really just trying to stress that the design is important, right? From like an FEA analysis, like as you test a wheel, you need to make sure it's strong and it can handle impacts. But the actual construction of the wheel is what's going to decide if a wheel is good or not just what it looks like. Now, why does nobody want to talk about this conversation? Well, it's tough because it's a drama llama filled experience, and mostly it's just everyone in a room throwing their own flavor covered shit at each other, telling you what you should like or what you shouldn't like. And that's the most annoying thing about the aftermarket car community, is trying to get opinion without opinion being seen as fact. So what ends up happening is, if you're a first time buyer, second time buyer, you really can't always afford the original wheels. And a lot of times that can be really expensive. You end up buying reps because they're typically more affordable. But you don't want to talk about that on the internet, because then the one person that bought TE37s is going to clown on you and talk a whole bunch of shit about it because they have real wheels. Now, going back, you could have heard me say, I said the first thing about why people don't like reps is because of the perceived quality loss, the technology that gets lost by buying a cheap version of the same designed wheel. And I never went back to the second part because I went on a rant. But that's the whole point of this video. It's 20 minutes. That's what you get me for, okay? It's free information. The second reason is because of something called heritage. There are people out there that really don't like that there are companies that sell a product that is almost identical in nature because it takes away the sale from the original wheel manufacturer. If you buy an Avid AV6, you're taking sales away from Volk, who's making the TE37. That conversation is a really tough thing to break down because I always want you to support the brands that you love and that you can support and that align with what you love. And if you fucking love spending a ton of money on a set of wheels because you want to feel like you're supporting work, then do it. That's awesome. That's super rad. I'm not entirely sure if they care as much as you care about that. I think that's much more of an American thing to have that much pride behind a brand, but it's still very exciting, and go do that. A lot of times somebody that's buying a more affordable wheel is using a price conscious method first. Nobody's going into buying a set of TE37 saying, I really can't wait to save a little bit of money in this process so that I can go spend more money somewhere else in the car bill. It's a huge purchase, and a lot of times people just aren't there. Now, where you will see that is in that mid-tier price point. When you're looking at wheels that are in the Koenig, Enki, Stage, wheel lineup, Kansei lineup, those wheels are very close together in price. And I would say if you bought a set of Enkis, you're probably taking away from Koenig. If you're buying from Koenig, you might be taking away from Stage. If you're buying from Stage, you might be taking away from Kansei because they are so close together. They all have very similar bolt patterns and styles. That is where I do think that that statement could really shine, where maybe something like a Graham Lights could potentially be taken away. But those wheels are still $2,200. They're not a cheap set of wheels, and a Work ZR10 is a $2,600 set of wheels. We want you to always think that as you're going through this, that you know exactly what you're getting, because you should feel confident in it. If you have a set of wheels that are budget friendly because you're banging on and sliding sideways, hell yeah, brother, more power to you. That's the best part of this, is that you're building your car. Don't build it for someone else. I think that is the stupidest thing you could possibly do. Now, last thing I'll say is 3-piece wheels do not equal rep or real. This is a big one, and I've seen this time and time again. And the reason that I don't say it's rep or real is because anybody can really go out and make a 3-piece wheel. If you know the right people, or you do a couple Google searches, you'll find somebody. There's 3 or 4 places in California where you can take a design. They will take an aluminum block. They will cut it into a billion different pieces for you. They'll slap it with an inner barrel and an outer lip. They'll put some hardware in it. They'll give it to you, and it'll cost you $12,000. You can do that. And they'll do maybe an FEA analysis test where they'll actually test the structural integrity of that design. But a lot of times they don't, and they won't, and they don't need to, because it's a custom-made wheel. Every single wheel is different than the last wheel that they're making. So we don't necessarily see a 3-piece wheel design as immediately being a rep or immediately being a real wheel. Instead, what we'd really like to see is that 3-piece wheel has had some sort of experience or heritage in motorsport. And that's how you kind of climb the ladder of, is it a rep, is it an inspired by design, or is it a real wheel design? The good news is through all of this, and honestly, if you look into my baby blue eyes, look into them. You should never feel bad for buying what you want to buy. You should never feel bad for wanting to modify your car your way. Guess what? If this is your first time building a car, second time modifying a car, even your 5th time modifying a car, I've got great news. You're gonna make something ugly by mistake anyway. You're gonna buy something that you may not like. You're gonna learn through the process of doing this. But the best part about it is that if you do it for you, it'll be a rad time, and you will love doing it every step of the way. You're not going to end the world by going budget on a set of wheels, and you're not going to end the world by spending $7,000 on a set of wheels. But the goal here is for you to know objectively, fully transparent, exactly what you're buying, so that you can focus on what matters most, not the part, but what the part does for your car. And if it does what it needs to, and you love that, and it's giving you what you want, I'm happy as a clam. If you guys have any questions on rep wheels, real wheels, inspired by wheels? Let us know in the comments below. We just dropped this new filter where you can actually see the construction of every single wheel, and you can see the design elements on if it's an original, an inspired by design, or if it's a replica wheel design. And we hope that you hear that through this entire 20 minutes. The biggest thing to keep in mind is the design is one element of what makes a wheel truly good or not good. The construction and the factory and the company behind it matters just as much, if not more than just the way a wheel looks. I'm Alex Martini. We hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys and gals so much for watching and for supporting Martiniworks. If you're looking for car parts, mod your car at martiniworks.com. Let us know what we should talk about next. Hopefully this didn't go badly. I think it went really well. I'm really excited to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for watching.